She was fired for being late. But the moment he realized she had saved his son's life, everything changed. Daniel Carter was a man everyone in the city knew. He was one of those people who could walk into a room and silence it with his presence. Sharp suit, cold eyes, and a voice that always sounded like a command. He had built his business empire from nothing and believed that discipline and hard work were the only reasons for success. People admired him, but most were afraid of him too. He never smiled, never forgave mistakes, and never tolerated excuses. For him, the world was simple. You were either on time or you were out. Every morning, Daniel reached his office before anyone else. His assistant always had to be ready with his schedule, his coffee, and his files exactly at 8 a.m., not 8:01, not a second late. And that assistant was Emily, a young woman in her late 20s with warm brown eyes and a calm smile. She had been working for Daniel for almost 2 years and was one of the few people who had managed to stay that long. Others had left within weeks because they couldn't handle the pressure. But Emily was different. Emily had learned to survive through difficult times. She was a single mother raising a little girl named Lily, who was 6 years old. Every day started early for her. She would wake up before dawn, prepare breakfast, dress Lily for school, and then take 2 buses to reach Daniel's company. Her life was not easy, but she never complained. She believed that kindness and patience could carry her through anything. While Daniel saw the world as a battlefield, Emily saw it as a chance to help and love people. Even when they didn't return that love, her colleagues liked her because she was always gentle and calm. Even when Daniel shouted at her for the smallest mistakes, she would just nod, apologize softly, and continue working. Deep inside, she understood that Daniel wasn't truly cruel. He just didn't know how to care. He had lost that ability somewhere in his success. Daniel, on the other hand, never noticed the quiet strength in her. To him, Emily was just another employee, another name on the payroll. He liked that she was efficient, never argued, and always finished her work perfectly. But he never once asked her how she was doing, or why she sometimes looked tired. In his world, emotions had no place in business. Every morning was the same. Daniel arrived sharply at 8 a.m. Emily was already there, her desk neatly organized, his coffee steaming, and the files arranged exactly how he liked them. She would greet him with a polite smile, and he would nod without a word. That was their routine, cold professionalism wrapped around quiet understanding. But behind Emily's calm face, there was a life full of struggle. Her daughter Lily had asthma, and many nights Emily stayed awake by her side, watching her breathe, praying she wouldn't have another attack. Sometimes she barely slept, but she still went to work with the same gentle smile. She knew she couldn't afford to lose this job. It was the only way she could keep their tiny apartment and pay for Lily's medicines. Daniel, meanwhile, lived in a world completely different from hers. His house was a mansion guarded by walls, filled with silence and expensive furniture. He had a son, Ethan, but rarely saw him. His wife had passed away years ago, and since then, Daniel had buried himself in work. He told himself he was doing it for Ethan, to give him everything he needed, but deep down he knew he was avoiding his pain. He didn't know how to be a father anymore. The little boy often spent time with his nanny, waiting for moments when his father would come home early, moments that almost never happened. Every employee in the company whispered stories about Daniel's temper. Some said he once fired a man for being late by just 5 minutes. Others said he had no heart at all. Emily never believed in gossip, but she had seen enough to know that he was a man of rules, and breaking those rules had consequences. Still, she respected him. There was something in his eyes, something lonely, that made her feel he wasn't as bad as people said. That week, Daniel was preparing for an important deal. He had meetings lined up back to back, and everything had to run smoothly. Emily worked late every evening to make sure all the documents were perfect. She went home tired, kissed her daughter goodnight, and whispered to herself that all her hard work would someday be worth it. Then came the morning that changed everything. The sun hadn't even risen yet when Emily's alarm rang. She got up quietly, made Lily's breakfast, and checked her bag to make sure she hadn't forgotten anything. Lily was sleepy and hugged her mother tightly, not wanting her to leave. "I'll be back soon, sweetheart," Emily whispered, brushing her daughter's hair. She dropped her off at school, waved goodbye, and hurried toward the bus stop. She didn't know that her life, and Daniel's, was about to turn upside down. While she walked down the street, she was thinking about the meeting Daniel had that morning. She had to reach early, prepare the files, and make sure his presentation was ready. She couldn't afford to be late. She glanced at her watch. She was right on time. Then, suddenly, she heard a sound that made her stop, a small voice crying. When she turned, she saw a little boy standing near the road, lost and scared. Cars rushed past dangerously close to him. Her heart jumped. The boy looked around, calling for his mother, tears rolling down his cheeks. Emily's instincts took over. Without thinking twice, she ran toward him, calling out softly, "It's okay, sweetheart, don't move." At that very moment, a car came speeding down the road, not seeing the boy. Emily dashed forward, grabbing the child just in time, pulling him to safety. Her heart was pounding. The driver honked angrily, but she didn't care. She hugged the boy tightly, whispering that he was safe now. The boy clung to her, sobbing. She asked his name, but he was too shaken to speak clearly. Minutes passed as she tried to calm him down. A small crowd gathered. Someone called the police. Emily stayed with the child until an officer arrived. She explained what had happened, gave them her contact number, and waited until they assured her that they would find his family. Only then did she realize how much time had passed. Her hands trembled as she looked at her watch. She was late. Not just a few minutes, but almost an hour. Her heart sank. She could already imagine Daniel's face, cold and angry. She hurried toward the bus stop, praying he would understand. But deep down, she knew what was coming. For Daniel Carter, no excuse was good enough. As the bus moved through traffic, Emily sat quietly, staring out the window. The morning sun was rising, painting the sky gold, but her heart was heavy. She had done something right, something good, yet she feared it would cost her everything. She whispered to herself, "At least the boy is safe." And far away, in another part of the city, Daniel Carter was already looking at his watch. Wondering where Emily was, unaware that the woman he was about to scold had just saved the life of someone who meant more to him than all his fortune combined. The morning started like any other for Emily. The sun was barely up when she left her small apartment. Her bag on one shoulder and a cup of coffee in her hand, the streets were quiet, the air cool, and she felt hopeful that the day would go smoothly. She had been working late the night before, preparing the presentation Daniel Carter. Her boss would deliver 2 important investors that morning. It was one of the biggest meetings of the year, and everything had to be perfect. Emily knew how serious Daniel was about timing. He hated being late, and he expected the same from everyone around him, especially her. Emily smiled softly as she walked her daughter, Lily, to school. Lily was her little world, her reason to keep going. They talked about school, friends, and the new book Emily promised to read to her that night. When they reached the school gate, Lily hugged her mother tightly before running inside. Emily watched her for a moment, feeling that small warmth that made all her tired mornings worth it. Then she turned toward the bus stop, checking her watch. She was right on schedule if the bus didn't delay. She would reach the office 15 minutes early, just as Daniel liked it as she walked down the road. Emily passed by a bakery, breathing in the smell of fresh bread. For a brief moment, she imagined buying something sweet for Lily on the way home. Life was tough, but small things like that made it beautiful. She smiled at the thought until something unexpected caught her attention. A small voice was crying somewhere near the main road. At first, she thought it was just a child throwing a tantrum, but when she looked closer, her heart stopped. A little boy, no older than 5, was standing dangerously close to the edge of the road. Cars sped by, honking loudly, and the child looked terrified and confused. He was alone, clutching a small toy car, his face red from crying. Emily's instincts took over. Without a second thought, she ran toward him. "Sweetheart, don't move," she called out, her voice calm but urgent. The boy looked up, startled, as another car rushed past just a few feet away. Emily's heart pounded. One wrong step and he could be gone. She moved quickly, weaving through the traffic, waving her hand to stop the cars. One driver slowed down and yelled something angrily, but she didn't care. She reached the boy, bent down, and wrapped her arms around him, pulling him safely to the sidewalk. "It's okay, it's okay. You're safe now," she whispered, trying to steady her breathing. The boy clung to her, trembling. His small hands gripped her coat tightly, and he buried his face in her shoulder. Emily could feel his little heart racing against her chest. After a few moments, she tried to calm him. "What's your name?" she asked softly. He sniffled and said between tears, "Ethan." His voice was tiny and scared. Emily brushed his hair gently. "Ethan, where's your mommy or daddy?" The boy shook his head, tears filling his eyes again. "I don't know. I can't find them." Emily looked around. The street was busy, full of cars and people rushing to work, but no one seemed to know where the boy came from. She stood up and scanned the area, hoping someone would recognize him. "It's okay, Ethan. We'll find your parents," she said reassuringly. She guided him to a nearby bench and sat down with him. A few people stopped to see what was going on. A woman offered Ethan some water, and a man called the police to report a lost child. Emily thanked them and stayed beside Ethan, holding his hand. He was still shaking, and his little toy car had fallen on the ground. She picked it up and placed it in his hand again. "Look, you still have your car," she said with a smile. He nodded weakly, clutching it close. Minutes turned into nearly half an hour. Emily's mind kept flicking back to her watch. She was already late for work. Her heart sank as she imagined Daniel's face, the disappointment, the anger. But every time she thought of leaving, she looked at Ethan and couldn't move. She couldn't just abandon a lost child. Soon, a police car arrived. 2 officers stepped out and walked toward them. One of them smiled kindly. "You're the lady who called about the boy?" Emily nodded. "Yes, I stayed with him so he wouldn't be alone." Ethan immediately clung tighter to her. The officer bent down and spoke gently. "Hey there, little man. We're going to help you find your parents, okay?" Ethan looked up at Emily, eyes full of fear. "You'll come too?" he whispered. Emily smiled softly, her heart melting. "I can't come with you, sweetheart, but you'll be safe with them. They're nice people." She turned to the officers and gave them her phone number. "Please call me if his parents aren't found," she said. The officer nodded. "We will, and thank you for what you did. You probably saved his life." The words hit Emily deeply. She looked at Ethan one last time as the officers guided him gently into the car. The boy waved at her through the window, and she waved back, trying not to cry. As the car drove away, Emily stood there for a moment, taking a deep breath. Her hands were shaking, her heart still racing. She looked at her watch and froze. It was already 8:45. She was supposed to be in Daniel's office at 8 o'clock sharp. Panic set in. She grabbed her bag and ran toward the bus stop. The bus had just left, and the next one wouldn't arrive for another 15 minutes. She bit her lip, fighting the urge to cry. She hailed a taxi, but none stopped. Her stomach twisted with worry. "He'll never forgive me," she whispered to herself. Finally, after what felt like forever, she managed to get a ride. As the car sped through the traffic, she rehearsed what she would say. She couldn't just tell Daniel she was late because of a child on the road. He never accepted excuses. He'd say she should have called, that her duty was to be at work no matter what. But how could she have left that little boy there? She would have never forgiven herself. The car stopped in front of the office building. Emily jumped out, rushed inside, and took the elevator, her heart beating fast. She tried to fix her hair and straighten her clothes, but her hands were trembling. She reached Daniel's office door and took a deep breath before knocking inside. Daniel sat at his desk, checking his watch for the 5th time. His face was hard, his jaw tight. Everyone in the office could feel the tension. His meeting was minutes away, and his assistant, the one he trusted most, was missing. When Emily finally entered, out of breath and pale, Daniel looked up sharply. His voice was cold. "You're late." Emily opened her mouth to explain, but he raised his hand. "Save it," he snapped. "Do you have any idea what you've done? You've ruined the entire morning." Her throat tightened. She wanted to tell him everything about the child, about the danger, but his tone made her freeze. He continued, his voice sharp as a knife. I've told you 100 times, Emily, punctuality is everything in this company. If you can't follow that, maybe you don't belong here. Her eyes burned with tears, but she stayed silent. In that moment, he didn't know that while he was sitting in his office waiting for her, she had been saving a child's life. A child who, unknown to both of them, was his own son. Emily stood there, heartbroken and speechless, realizing that sometimes doing the right thing could still cost you everything. And Daniel, blinded by his rules, had no idea that fate had just written the most painful lesson of his life. Emily had never felt such a heavy weight in her chest before. The morning had started with a rush of purpose and hope, but now, as she stood in front of Daniel Carter's desk, that hope felt like it was being crushed beneath an invisible hand. She tried to steady her breath, tried to think of the words she could use to explain herself. After all, she hadn't been late out of carelessness or laziness. She had been doing something that no one else might have done, something brave, something that mattered more than time or work. But looking at Daniel now, she could see that no amount of explanation would soften him. His eyes were cold, sharp, and unyielding. He was a man who ruled his office with precision and discipline, and he believed that any deviation from the rules was a personal betrayal. Daniel's voice cut through the silence like a whip. Emily, this is unacceptable. You know the importance of this meeting? You know how strict I am about time. And yet, here you are, late without a word. His words weren't just angry. They were disappointed, a kind of disappointment that sank deep into her stomach. She wanted to speak, to tell him why she had been late, but his gaze pinned her in place. She could feel the tension in the room, the way other employees watched quietly, afraid to even breathe, knowing what might come next. Emily opened her mouth to say something, but nothing came out. Her throat felt dry, and a lump formed there. Daniel leaned back in his chair, tapping his fingers on the desk, his eyes never leaving her. The silence stretched long enough for her to feel every second like a judgment. She wanted to explain, wanted to tell him that she hadn't been careless. But she also knew that Daniel Carter did not have patience for excuses. For him, rules were absolute. She swallowed hard and finally said, I'm sorry, sir. But Daniel wasn't satisfied. Sorry doesn't change the fact that you've ruined the morning. You've shown a lack of responsibility, Emily. If you can't respect time, maybe you don't deserve this position. The words hit her like a physical blow. Emily had always known this day might come. She had always feared that one. Mistake could cost her everything, but she hadn't expected it to feel this sharp, this final. She felt tears prickling her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Not here, not in front of him. Her mind raced, thinking of how to respond. She wanted to tell him about the boy, how he had been alone and in danger, how she had risked her own safety to save him. She wanted to make him see that sometimes doing the right thing was more important than a schedule, but she knew it would fall on deaf ears. Daniel Carter was not a man who would consider such things. He saw actions only through the lens of efficiency and rules. He didn't see the heart behind them. As she stood there, trying to steady herself, she felt a mixture of fear and sadness. Fear, because she had always respected Daniel and his authority, and sadness, because she knew he would never understand. She had worked for him for 2 years, and in that time, she had given him her best. She had organized his files perfectly, anticipated his needs, stayed late countless nights to prepare for his meetings. And yet, in one moment, everything seemed to vanish. Her hard work, her dedication, it didn't matter. All that mattered was that she had been late, and that, in Daniel's world, was unforgivable. Daniel's expression hardened further, and Emily realized there was no softening him. He was like a wall, immovable and rigid. She nodded silently, accepting what was coming. She had known that in his world rules were absolute. She didn't argue, didn't try to fight. She simply understood that this was the consequence of her actions. Even if those actions had been the right thing to do, Daniel took a deep breath, as if to punctuate the moment. I'm sorry, Emily. I can't keep you on if you can't be here on time. Consider this your last day. The words were delivered coldly, without hesitation, and they hit her like a hammer. Emily felt a strange numbness spread through her body. Her first instinct was disbelief. Fired. After all she had done, after all her dedication, she was being let go for something she hadn't even intended. She wanted to speak, to explain herself, but the words felt trapped inside her. Unable to escape, she gathered her courage and said softly, "I understand." Her voice was calm, but her heart was breaking. She looked around the office, seeing the shocked faces of her colleagues. Some avoided her eyes, fearing they might be drawn into Daniel's wrath. Others looked sad, silently recognizing the injustice of it all. Emily felt a pang of sorrow for the office she had loved and the work she had poured herself into. It was more than a job. It had been a place where she had felt capable, valued, and part of something bigger. And now it was gone, taken from her in a single moment of rigid judgment. As she packed her things quietly, Emily's mind wandered back to the boy she had saved. A small comfort, but a comfort nonetheless. She thought of his little face, the fear in his eyes, and the way he had clung to her for safety. That had been the right thing to do, she told herself. Saving him had been more important than being on time for Daniel Carter. But it didn't stop the sting of losing her job or the fear of what would come next. How would she support Lily? How would she explain this to her daughter? She left the office, her head held high despite the tears threatening to fall. She walked through the familiar streets, each step heavier than the last. The city seemed different, now less welcoming, less safe. The hustle and bustle of people going about their mornings felt distant, like she was moving through a world she no longer belonged to. And yet, she reminded herself of the boy she had saved. She had done something meaningful. That thought gave her a strange mix of pride and sorrow, because while she had done good, the world of Daniel Carter had punished her for it. Meanwhile, Daniel watched her leave, sitting alone in his office. At first, he felt a cold satisfaction, believing he had done what was necessary to maintain order and discipline. He told himself that rules were rules, and no one was above them. Yet, beneath that satisfaction, a strange unease began to creep in. Something didn't feel right. He couldn't place it. But there was a nagging sensation that something important had happened this morning, something he hadn't seen. He shook his head, trying to dismiss it. "She's late. That's all," he muttered to himself, repeating the mantra he had used countless times before. But even as he tried to focus on his work, he couldn't shake the thought of Emily standing there, quiet and composed despite being scolded and fired. There had been something in her eyes, a strength and calmness that was unlike anyone else he had ever worked with. It made him uncomfortable in a way he didn't like. He wasn't used to feeling unsettled by someone he thought he had control over. Emily walked home slowly that evening, her bag lighter without the files she had carried for Daniel. Lily greeted her with a bright smile, unaware of the day's events. Emily forced a smile back, hiding the turmoil inside. She played with her daughter, helped her with homework, and tucked her into bed, all while thinking about the events that had unfolded. She knew that life had just given her one of the harshest lessons yet. Doing the right thing wasn't always recognized or rewarded, and sometimes it came with a price. As she sat alone that night, Emily couldn't help but feel a mixture of sadness and quiet pride. She had acted with courage, with compassion, and with integrity. She had saved a life, and that knowledge was hers to keep. And yet, the cost had been heavy. She had lost her job, the security she had worked so hard for, and the approval of the man she had respected. She closed her eyes, taking a deep breath, trying to prepare herself for the uncertain days ahead. Little did she know, the morning's events were far from over. Fate had a way of revealing truths that people couldn't see at first glance. And in that moment, while Emily felt defeated, the story was only beginning. The boy she had saved that morning would soon change everything, and Daniel Carter would come face to face with a truth that would shatter his pride and force him to see the world and Emily in a completely new light. The night passed slowly, and Emily went to bed exhausted, her mind replaying the day over and over. She wondered if she had made the right choice, if she could have done something differently. But deep down, she knew she had acted with her heart, not her fear. And sometimes acting with the heart came with risks. This that she was willing to take, no matter the consequences. And so, the stage was set. Emily, the quiet, a brave woman who had lost everything for doing the right thing, and Daniel, the man who ruled with rules and had yet to realize the true value of courage and kindness, were about to have their worlds collide in ways neither of them could have imagined. Daniel Carter sat in his office the next morning, the weight of the previous day pressing heavily on him. He tried to focus on his work, on the mountains of paperwork and emails demanding his attention, but his mind kept wandering. Something about Emily's face, the way she had stood quietly while he scolded her, refused to leave him. There was a strength in her calmness, a quiet courage he had never seen in anyone else who worked for him. He told himself it didn't matter. Rules were rules, and she had broken them. But the feeling of unease didn't fade. Meanwhile, Emily had returned to her small apartment the night before, exhausted and worried. She had tried to focus on Lily, her daughter, helping her with homework and preparing breakfast for the next day, but her thoughts kept drifting back to Daniel. She hadn't been able to explain herself. She hadn't been able to tell him that she had been late because she had saved a child from a dangerous street, a child who had been alone and terrified. She wondered if he would ever understand. That morning, as Daniel prepared for his early meetings, a phone call arrived that would change everything. The receptionist handed him the phone, and a hospital voice spoke urgently on the other end. "Mr. Carter, we need to speak with you immediately. There has been an incident involving your son, Ethan. He was found safe, thanks to a woman who helped him just in time. You need to come to the hospital right away." What? His mind raced. His son? Safe? What incident? The words felt like a punch to his chest. He grabbed his coat, rushed out of the office, and ran to his car. The drive to the hospital was a blur. His hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, his heart pounding. Every second felt like an eternity. He kept replaying every possible scenario in his mind. What could have happened to his son? Was he hurt? Was he okay? When he arrived at the hospital, he found Ethan sitting on a bed, wrapped in a blanket, wide-eyed, but unharmed. Beside him was a woman, gentle and calm, speaking softly to the boy and holding his hand. She looked ordinary in her simplicity, a plain shirt, tidy hair, and a kind face that radiated warmth. And then Daniel saw her fully. His heart skipped a beat. It was Emily, the same Emily he had fired just yesterday for being late. Daniel's mind raced. How could this be possible? He felt a mix of confusion, disbelief, and a sudden, sharp guilt. His son's life had been in danger, and this woman, the one he had scolded, the one he had judged and punished, had saved him. His pride, his rules, his anger, all of it crashed down on him like a wave. He couldn't breathe for a moment, his thoughts spinning. How could he have been so blind? How could he have punished someone for doing something truly heroic? Emily noticed Daniel standing at the doorway, his face pale and tense. She remained calm, not wanting to embarrass him or make the situation worse. She had saved Ethan without expecting recognition or reward. Her focus had been entirely on the boy's safety. She had been brave without thinking, acting instinctively because it was the right thing to do. And now, seeing Daniel's expression, she understood the storm that had been brewing in him. Daniel approached slowly, his eyes locked on Emily. You saved him?" His voice was low, almost a whisper, as if he couldn't believe the words were real. Emily nodded softly, her hands still holding Ethan's small ones. "Yes, sir." He was alone, in a car. It was coming too fast. I just grabbed him in time. Daniel's chest tightened. The weight of yesterday, the anger he had felt, the decision to fire her, all of it hit him at once. He could feel the shame creeping in, a bitter taste that made him sick. He had been so focused on rules and time that he had completely missed what truly mattered: life, safety, and courage. And he had punished the woman who had risked herself for his child. Emily looked at him quietly. She didn't need his gratitude. She didn't expect it. But Daniel's reaction told her everything she needed to know. His eyes softened, a vulnerability he rarely showed breaking through. She could see the human side of him, the father who had been blind to the risks around his son, the man who had always believed control and rules were the most important things. Now he was seeing something he had never considered: bravery, compassion, and selflessness. Daniel took a deep breath, struggling to find words. "Emily, I don't know what to say. His voice trailed off, breaking under the weight of his guilt. He stepped closer, unable to stop himself from reaching out, as if he wanted to touch the proof of her courage with his own eyes. He realized how close he had been to tragedy, and how wrong he had been to judge her so harshly. "I fired you yesterday." "For being late?" Emily's eyes met his, calm and steady. She didn't speak immediately. She simply let him process his realization. She had no anger, no bitterness. She had acted because it was right. And now that truth stood before him. Undeniable. Daniel's mind replayed everything: the angry words he had spoken, the judgment he had passed, the cold dismissal of her life and her actions. And now he understood the depth of his mistake. He had punished a hero. He had been blind to courage and humanity, blinded by pride and rules. A strange, crushing guilt settled over him, heavier than any business failure he had ever faced. He looked at Ethan, who now smiled faintly, clutching Emily's hand. The boy's eyes were bright, and he seemed safe, secure. Daniel's heart tightened further. He realized that Emily had given his son something far more valuable than just safety. She had given him life, care, and protection in a moment when he and Daniel could not. Emily finally spoke, her voice soft. "He's okay now, sir. That's all that matters." Her words were simple, but they carried the weight of truth. Daniel felt his throat tighten. He wanted to apologize, but the words felt too small for the enormity of his mistake. He wanted to explain himself, to justify his actions, but he couldn't. Nothing he could say would undo the moment he had failed to recognize her courage. For a long moment, silence filled the room. Daniel looked at her, searching for a sign that she was angry, that she would never forgive him. But there was nothing. Only calm. Only quiet strength. And that realization hit him harder than anything else. He had judged, punished, and dismissed someone who had done something extraordinary, and she hadn't even expected praise. Daniel's mind worked fast, thinking about the next steps. He needed to correct his mistake, not just for himself, but for Ethan and for Emily. He needed to find a way to make things right, to acknowledge her courage, to show that he understood what she had done. And in that moment, he felt a shift in himself, something that had never happened before. The rigid, controlling man who valued rules over people felt something he hadn't felt in years: humility. He took a deep breath and looked at Emily again. I don't know how to thank you properly. You saved him. You saved my son's life, and I was wrong to fire you." His voice was trembling slightly, unsteady, as if the weight of guilt and gratitude collided inside him. Emily nodded, listening, but she didn't rush to respond. She knew the moment was bigger than words. Daniel realized that this incident had changed him. It wasn't just about Emily or Ethan. It was about life, priorities, and seeing people for who they truly were. He had spent so many years valuing rules over courage, order over humanity. But now he saw that the greatest acts of heroism often went unnoticed, that people like Emily acted out of compassion without expecting anything in return. Emily quietly stood there, letting him absorb the reality of the situation. She had saved a child, and that child happened to be Daniel's son. The coincidence was almost unbelievable, but the truth was undeniable. Daniel's pride, his anger, his rigid beliefs, they had been shattered by this single act of bravery. And for the first time, he understood that life wasn't about being perfect or following rules blindly. Life was about people, about compassion, about courage in the face of danger. The moment lingered, heavy with emotion. Daniel looked at Emily and then at Ethan, feeling a mix of awe, relief, and deep regret. He realized that she had not only saved his son, but had also opened his eyes to a truth he had long ignored. He had judged too quickly, punished too harshly, and failed to see the hero standing right in front of him. And in that moment, Daniel Carter, the billionaire known for his discipline and unyielding rules, learned a lesson that no amount of money, power, or control could ever teach him, sometimes. The most important things in life cannot be measured by schedules, deadlines, or authority. Sometimes they are measured by courage, kindness, and the quiet bravery of someone willing to do what is right, even when no one is watching. Daniel Carter stood frozen in the hospital room, the events of the morning crashing over him like a storm. His son, Ethan, safe and unharmed, was sitting on the bed with Emily by his side. The realization that the woman he had fired just the day before had saved his son's life was overwhelming. He felt a mix of shock, guilt, and deep admiration, all at once. For years, he had prided himself on control, rules, and order, believing that discipline was the foundation of success. But now, he realized that his understanding of the world had been incomplete. There were things more important than schedules and efficiency. There were acts of courage, compassion, and humanity that could not be measured by time. He took a deep breath, trying to steady his shaking hands. He had always been a man who gave orders and expected obedience. Confronted with Emily's bravery, he felt exposed, as if a mirror had been held up to show him the flaws he had long ignored. She had saved Ethan without hesitation, without thinking of herself, and without expecting any reward. And yet, he had punished her. Daniel's chest tightened with guilt. He had judged her by his own rigid standards, never stopping to consider the person she truly was. Emily looked at him calmly, her eyes steady and kind. She had no anger, no resentment, only a quiet dignity that only deepened Daniel's remorse. He realized that she had acted purely from instinct and goodness, strength he had never recognized in the office environment he had created. The more he looked at her, the more he understood that her courage was not extraordinary in the dramatic sense, but extraordinary in its selflessness. She had put herself in harm's way to protect a child, his child, and expected nothing in return. "Emily," Daniel finally said, his voice low and unsteady. "I was wrong. I shouldn't have fired you. I didn't know." His words faltered as he tried to express the mix of emotions inside him. His pride, which had always been his guiding principle, felt heavy and meaningless compared to what she had done. He wanted to apologize, but even the word sorry seemed inadequate to capture the depth of his regret. Emily gave him a gentle nod, understanding his turmoil. She did not speak immediately. She had acted without expectation of reward. Her focus had always been on the child's safety, and yet she could see the sincerity in Daniel's eyes, a man confronting his own mistakes and realizing the human cost of his rigidity. For the first time, Daniel Carter felt truly vulnerable, seeing not just the person in front of him, but the consequences of his own actions. Daniel stepped closer, still trying to find the right words. You saved him, my son. You risked yourself, and I punished you for being late. I don't know how to make this right." His voice broke slightly, betraying the flood of emotions he had kept buried for years. Emily remained calm, her presence steady and reassuring. Allowing him the space to process everything, he looked at Ethan, who was clutching Emily's hand tightly. Still trembling slightly from the morning's fear, the sight of his son safe, cared for, and comforted by Emily hit Daniel in a way that business, money, or power never had. He realized that his focus on rules and control had blinded him to what truly mattered: life, compassion, and the people who could make a difference when it counted most. "I can't believe I didn't see it before," Daniel whispered, almost to himself. "I didn't see you. I didn't see what mattered. I only saw the time. I only saw the rule." His hands shook as he ran them through his hair, a gesture of frustration and realization. For the first time, he understood that being a leader wasn't just about authority or control. It was about recognizing courage, appreciating humanity, and valuing the people around him, not just for what they could do, but for who they were. Emily finally spoke softly. "It's okay, sir. What matters is that he's safe." Her words were simple, but they carried immense power. Daniel felt the weight of them, realizing that she had acted from a place of true integrity, without seeking approval, recognition, or reward. He had been so focused on rules and hierarchy that he had overlooked the most important lesson life had tried to teach him: that greatness often lies in humility and courage, not in power or authority. Daniel took a deep breath and made a decision. He needed to fix this, not just for himself, but for Ethan, for Emily, and for the way he would see the world from now on. "Emily," he said, his voice steadier but filled with earnest emotion, "I want you back at the company. I want you to work here, not because you have to, but because I want you to. I've been blind to your worth, and I can't let that continue. Will you come back?" Emily hesitated. She had never worked for Daniel out of desire for money or prestige. She had worked because she needed to provide for Lily and because she had respected him professionally. But now, seeing his genuine remorse, she felt a small shift in her own heart. She didn't act immediately. Instead, she looked at Ethan, who was now calmer, and then back at Daniel. She wanted to make sure that his words were true, that this offer was not simply a way to erase his guilt, but a recognition of her value and integrity. Daniel saw the pause and nodded, understanding her caution. "Take your time," he said quietly. "I only want what is right for you. And I want you to know I will never judge you again based on rules alone. I've learned that the heart matters more than anything else." The moment hung in the air, heavy with emotion. Daniel realized that the relationship he had with Emily and the way he had managed his company had to change. This was not just about a single act of bravery. It was about recognizing people for who they truly were, and about learning that leadership required empathy and humanity, not just strict rules. Finally, Emily smiled softly, the tension in her body easing. "I'll come back," she said, her voice calm but resolute. "Not because I need to, but because I believe this company can be more than rules. And I believe you can be more than what you've been." Daniel felt a surge of relief and gratitude. He knew that this was the beginning of something new, not just for the company, but for himself, and for the relationship he would now build with Emily and with Ethan from that day forward. Daniel Carter's perspective changed. He began to see his employees not just as workers who followed rules, but as individuals capable of courage, kindness, and humanity. He learned to value people for their integrity, their decisions in difficult moments, and their capacity for empathy. Emily's bravery had not only saved his son, but it had also opened his eyes to a truth he had long ignored. He was no longer just a strict, unyielding boss. He was a man learning to lead with compassion, respect, and understanding. Ethan, unaware of the full gravity of what had happened, now saw Emily not just as someone who had comforted him, but as a hero. Daniel watched them together and felt a gratitude he could never fully express. He realized that saving a life was the most profound act one could ever do, and that recognition or reward were secondary to the impact of that action. Emily returned to work, but things were different now. Daniel treated her with respect and admiration, understanding the depth of her courage and integrity. She became more than an assistant. She became a trusted partner, someone whose judgment and heart he relied on in ways he had never relied on anyone before. Her act of bravery had changed not just the course of a morning, but the course of a life. His, hers, and Ethan's. Daniel never forgot the lesson he learned that day, that human kindness, courage, and selflessness are far more powerful than money, power, or authority. Emily had shown him that true greatness lies not in the ability to control, but in the ability to care. And for the first time in years, Daniel Carter felt a profound sense of humility, gratitude, and hope. Hope that the world and his company could be a place where compassion mattered just as much as rules. From that moment on, Daniel, Emily, and Ethan were connected in a way that went beyond work or family. They shared a bond forged in courage, trust, and the quiet heroism of a woman who had acted selflessly when it mattered most. Daniel had been changed forever, not just as a boss, but as a human being who had finally understood the true meaning of bravery, kindness, and the value of life.